Hey there, and welcome back to the Coachable Podcast. If you're new here, I am your host, Tori Gordon. And if you're returning, welcome back to the show. Today, it is just me and you, or me and whoever is on the other side of the screen. If you're sitting at home with a friend or a loved one watching this episode, I'm excited to spend a little bit of time together because over the last couple of weeks, as we've been putting out more and more content on this show and on this channel, one of the number one things I've been getting feedback on is that you guys have really been enjoying these solo episodes. And there's really a few things that I love more than just getting to sit down and share my heart and share some of the concepts and ideas and things that I have been personally working through, that I've been growing through, and that I've been seeing pop up with my friends and my clients. And so today in this episode and in this conversation, I want to share with you around the concept of imagination and how we as individuals and as adults use our imagination in our everyday lives. And the reason I want to talk about this is because recently I've had multiple conversations with people about things that they've been struggling with, big fears or challenges that they're moving through, things that they're wanting to prevent happening, anxious thoughts. And so if you are somebody who struggles with anxiety, struggles with feeling like you're constantly worrying about what's going to happen or how you can protect yourself or how you can prevent something bad from happening, or even how to defend or protect yourself from something happening that you're almost preemptively expecting is going to happen. And all of that is related to your imagination. So I want you to think back to when you were a child and think about what you liked to do for fun, how you liked to play. For me, I think about being in my front yard with a couple friends, playing and using the tree in my front yard. And there was this specific part of the tree trunk that looked different than the rest of the tree. And it was this huge magnolia tree. I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So magnolia trees are a big part of the culture down there. And when I was little, I would imagine that this part of the tree was almost like a drive-through. I used it and pretended that I was driving my little car up to the drive-through and I was going to put in my order. And I think about how as children, I would make up plays, I would make up dances, I would make up stories, and how much I loved and creating something in my mind that didn't exist. And for many of us, especially those who have really challenging childhoods, even though I had a really beautiful kind of idyllic in many ways childhoods, many people didn't. And I know that for many of us who experience that, we use our imagination as a way to escape, as a way to leave our realities. And maybe we would find ourselves getting caught up in fairy tales or stories or books as a way to escape our everyday reality. Regardless of what your childhood was like or how you used your imagination when you were younger, oftentimes we use our imagination to create a world that didn't exist. And it was typically a world we wanted to explore, a world we wanted to live in, even for a little bit of time. And, our imagination is one of our main mental faculties. If you don't know what a mental faculty is, we have several. One of them being our imagination, another being our memory, another being our intellect. These are all capacities and capabilities of the powerful mind that we have. And our imagination is one that we can use that can create heaven or can create hell. And so I want you in this conversation over the next few minutes to think about, how are you currently utilizing your imagination? Are you using it to create possibility, to create heaven on earth, to create a world that you want to live in? Or are you imagining every worst case scenario? Are you imagining how everything could go wrong? Are you imagining stress and worst case scenario outcomes? Are you even predicting it? And therefore, in some ways, creating it? Because wherever we put our attention, where attention goes, energy flows. And what I'm noticing and what I have been thinking about and contemplating recently is just how many of us are sending our mental energy, our life force energy, our ability to create in a direction that we actually don't want it to go. How often are we using our minds and our imagination to create worlds that we want to escape from, that we don't want to live in? So think about that question as I continue, because you hold the power to create heaven and hell. You know, I grew up in a culture that was really religious, really focused on, I had a lot of belief systems ingrained into me that it was very important that I, accepted Jesus as my savior and gave my life to him so that I could in one day have hopes of, spending eternity in heaven. And as I've matured and as I've, evolved and opened my consciousness, I've realized that although, yes, I'm an eternal being and I will spend eternity somewhere doing God knows what, I don't claim to know. But what I'm more focused on is, am I creating heaven or hell in my personal life right now? And there's a book that I read almost every single year that is one of my favorite books of all times. And it's by a woman who's been on this show. Her name is Marianne Williamson, incredible spiritual teacher, guide, and leader. And her book is called A Return to Love. And in her book, she talks about heaven and hell. And she has a quote that I love that says, "Love in your mind produces love in your life. This is the meaning of heaven. Fear in your mind produces fear in your life. This is the meaning of hell." And I'm wondering right now, as you sit across from this camera, wherever you are in the world, are you living in a hell that you've created in your mind or a heaven? Now, here's the thing. I understand so well that there are things that happen beyond our control, things we didn't ask for, things that are unpleasant, things that we feel are unfair. But there are certain things that we can control. And that's what we have to be responsible for in our lives. And it's the story that we tell about why things happen, or, the meaning that we apply to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So I want you to think about where you are right now in your life, financially, relationally, in your career, whether, you're in a place where you're really unhappy with the results you're getting, or there's areas that you want to improve. And what circumstance have you been through recently that was less than ideal? Maybe you've gone through a really challenging divorce or breakup. Maybe you and a best friend recently, had a fight and are on the outs, or you got let go of a job, or you didn't get the job that you were really hoping for. There's so many scenarios that we can think about that are less than ideal and oftentimes unpleasant. And I'm curious, what is the meaning that you've attached to that? So a concept I want you to consider is that as human beings, part of being a conscious, aware, awake human being, we are inherently meaning-making creatures. We apply meaning to our world and to what we see and to what we experience. And so whatever circumstance you find yourself in, wherever you find yourself in your life, what story are you telling about that? Think about it. Are you telling the story that you're not where you should be, that you're not far along enough, something's wrong with you, you're broken, you're never gonna get to where you want to be, right? There's so many beliefs, so many stories that we can add on top of a circumstance. And so I think about some of the most challenging things in my life. Times where my heart was absolutely broken because a relationship didn't work out the way I had hoped. And then the story that I tell about that person or why they did that thing or why this unfolded the way it did. And that story can either be one that is empowering or completely disempowering. And how just simply by the story that I apply on top of the circumstance, I am creating a heaven or a hell that I then live in. And if you can start to notice the stories that you're applying, right? If you can see that circumstances is really neutral, it's not good or inherently bad. It is what it is. It just is. And then we as human beings apply our meaning on top of it. And a lot of times we label these things as good and bad and right and wrong because we grow up in a culture and a society that teaches us to label everything, to judge everything. It's the black and white is living in duality, essentially. But we are the ones that get to decide what anything really means. And recently I was talking to a client of mine, and she was telling me about this upcoming trip that she has. She's going to Europe with her fiance to meet his family for the first time. And although this is a trip that most people would be very excited about, she is riddled with anxiety and stress. And she's thinking about this fear that she has of flying and how she's anticipating being overcome with panic and having to drug herself so that she can sleep through the experience, and this worry that she has that it's going to be put strain and stress on the relationship. And what if she gets there and his family doesn't like her, and then that possibly could lead to them having a fight, and then what if that leads to them breaking up, and the spiral of thoughts that just came cascading out of her. And I asked her the same question. Do you recognize that you're using your imagination to tell that story? And how in the same way you could utilize that attention and that energy to tell one that you want to read, that you want to live. You could tell a story about what if it all goes right? What if we have a beautiful adventure? What if this experience brings us closer? What if because of this trip, I feel more connected to my new, extended family? What if we make unbelievable memories that will have the rest of our lives? Those are also possibilities that exist, but yet so many of us filter our imagination through the lens of negativity. And yet we all have a negativity bias, and many of us default to worst case scenario thinking. We have to oftentimes use our conscious awareness, our conscious thought to project a story that is one that has a happy ending, that is a story that if we watched it on Netflix or we read it in a book would be one that would leave us feeling good inside, not sad and depressed. And so I know this is kind of a simple concept, but I don't know how many of us really think about when we're ruminating, or not even ruminating, when we're so anxious about the future and we're thinking about all the things that could go wrong and worrying. We're so caught up in that mind, that mental chatter. We don't realize that what we're utilizing is our imagination. So for a moment, I'd like you to think about whatever it is in your life that you're going through that seems challenging, that seems like something you don't want. And imagine how all of this could be setting you up for something better than you could have ever imagined. Nikki, my roommate, and I, and who's been on the show multiple times, and I reference a lot on the show, we've lived together for a little over a year now, and we're happy in our place. We've made it our own. We've decorated just the way that we like, and we're very settled. And about a week and a half ago now, I get a text from a friend who's a realtor in town, and she says, "Hey, sorry to let you know this, but your landlord has decided to sell the house, and you have to be out in 30 days. So this is an example of something that's happened in my life recently that I was not expecting, where life, God, universe, whatever you want to label that as, has made a decision for me, right? This is out of my control. The guy who owns the property that we live on has made a choice, and now that choice affects me and Nikki, and we're going to have to move accordingly. Now, when we got that news, I noticed in my body this immediate sense of resistance. No, 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 no. I don't want that. No, this can't be happening. Please, God, make this, I hope like I'm just dreaming. This can't be real. We can't be moving in 30 days. What are we going to do? The cascade of thoughts that then came after that of, oh, this is going to set us back. How are we going to make this happen? This is just piled on so much stress, so much anxiety. What if we don't find a place? Are we going to be homeless? You can just imagine where my mind went. But why I share this story is because within a few minutes, really, I probably spent 15 minutes imagining all of the horrible scenarios that could happen. And I realized, and I stopped. I realized what I was doing and I paused. And I checked in with my body, and I could feel its contraction. I could feel its resistance. I could feel it wanting to close and hide and just be like, make it stop, And I remembered that I am the narrator. I get to decide what I'm making this mean. I get to apply meaning to this unfortunate or unexpected circumstance. And what I even am careful to say, it's unfortunate because that is a judgment that I was having. And so what I did is I stopped and I slowed down, because what you'll notice is when you get caught up in the mind, it starts to move really fast and it becomes frantic. It becomes chaotic. It's like when the winds of change come and it's blowing the waves around at the top of the surface, things are pretty, stormy. But I dropped in and I breathed and I went inward and I got below the surface. And I remembered that I could change the story. And so I completely changed my focus and my attention. And I said, if this is happening, there has to be a reason, because I choose to believe that life, universe, God, whatever you want to call it, is on my team, is on my side. And sometimes God has a way of forcing you or moving you into a new place, a new season of your life. Because when you have your heels dug in and you get so comfortable, sometimes there has to be something that happens outside of your control to move you into action, into the next phase. Can happen when you're, an unexpected breakup happens. You get sick, you get news you aren't expecting, right? And your comfort, where you have been very comfortably situated, is now telling you it's time to change, whether you like it or not. And I realized it was up to me, that I could decide that I'm either going to like it or I'm going to fight it. So I decided to embrace it, to let it in and to say, hey, this is happening for me. This must be a setup for something better than I could have ever expected. And so I started to channel my energy, my attention and my story in a way that served me and actually created a better feeling in my body. Because when I start to tell a story that everything's happening, it's going to shit and nothing's happening the way I want it, I feel completely defeated. It's a victimhood mentality. It's me against the world. It's how am I ever going to, get to where I want to be if all of these things keep happening to me, right? Versus seeing it through the lens of this is happening for a reason. It's happening for me to move me into something even greater. And so I started to anchor in that feeling. I started to tell a story and write a narrative that actually supported that in terms of the thoughts that I focused on. Because here's the thing, the mind will think. That is what it is built to do. Now it is up to you to determine whether you believe those thoughts. And it's important that you understand that, one, you don't have to believe everything you think. That might be a revelation for some people. Just because you think it doesn't make it true. So I chose to believe and to give energy and attention to the thoughts that made me feel good. That all of this was conspiring in my favor, that there was going to be a better place, a better location, a better home for us that was going to be able to serve and meet our needs in ways that we didn't even know we were calling in, that we didn't even realize was a prayer, but it was. And so as quickly as I was panicked, I got excited. Because what happens when you start to believe a thought, or you say a thought is true, because here's the thing, a belief is just a thought that you've had many times, and then you label that thought as true. That thought produces a feeling. It produces a chemical reaction in the brain that then produces an emotional reaction. And then from there, we take action. We behave based on how we think and how we feel. And then we wind up with results. So if you don't like the results that you're getting in your life, you need to go back to think about, what am I thinking? What am I believing? And what feeling is that producing internally that I'm then acting on or not acting on? So I started to tell this story. This is all for me. I'm getting excited then as a byproduct of this new story of like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see where we end up. I can't wait to see how the universe supports us and brings us exactly what we need and where we need it, so that we can continue to do the work that we're meant to do in an even greater way, so that we can feel even more at home and more at peace and have a sanctuary that we love to come home to, and that we can serve people in, and we can have people over, because we lived in a home that was, fairly small, in a 2-bedroom townhome that didn't have a ton of space for extra social gatherings or having ceremony in our house or doing anything, that we really loved doing. It limited us in how many people we could bring to our house. And so this excitement started to brew. And I was like, I'm looking forward to this, instead of I'm like, I'm resisting this, essentially. I tell you not, within an hour of getting this news, I have to say I'm very fortunate. I've intentionally created a community and a network of people here that really have my back and support us. And we put, the message out to our community and said, hey, we just got this news. Can't believe this. We're kind of in a pickle. Does anyone know about, houses for rent or anything? Like, it would really support us. And as soon as I did that, Nikki thought, oh, I remember one of our friends mentioning they were moving and they had their house for rent. I tell you this because literally within the hour of finding out we have to move, I was on the phone with somebody who it was trying to rent their house out. By that evening, we were at the house looking at it. It was right within our price range. We get a bigger house, single family home. Now my dog has a backyard. We have an extra spare room. We're going to have plenty of space to host people, to host all the things that we want. It's a huge upgrade for us. And yet we would never have been able to create that reality, this new heaven for ourselves, if we were so fixated on the story that this is all going wrong. So this is why I want to bring this up, because you are that creator. You are the narrator. You are the storyteller. And whatever circumstance you find yourself in, you get to apply the story. And recently, with this client that I'm mentioning, I told her, an exercise that you can do that you might find helpful is to pull out a journal, and on the left-hand side of the page, let your mind go wild and let it be, that chaotic, crazy, frantic mind that's telling all the stories about how it's all going to go to shit. Because here's the thing, most of the time when we're thinking about worst case scenarios, we don't realize how dramatic and crazy we're being. And if you actually think about the worst case, like for instance, when I was starting my business years ago now, the biggest fear was that I wasn't going to be able to pay my bills, support myself. And I was like, oh, I'm going to end up homeless. No, that's not the reality. The truth is, if I start a business and I bet on myself, and if it doesn't work out, the worst case scenario is that I've got to go back to corporate, got to go back and get a job. And I realized, you know what? I was living my worst case scenario. So why not jump? Why not take the leap? So often our worst case scenario is so far from reality, but often when we focus our energy and our attention on what could go wrong, we actually attract that into our lives. Because here's the thing, the subconscious mind, the part of your brain, the part of your mind that is running 90% of the show and is responsible for about 90% of your actions and behaviors, it doesn't know the difference between a real circumstance and an imagined one. Let me say that again. Your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and an imagined reality. It also doesn't know the word don't. So when you say, I don't want blank to happen, all it hears is, I want blank to happen. It doesn't understand don't. So what the subconscious mind does is you give it a command and it goes out and creates and finds evidence to prove that true. So this is why it's so important to master your mind and to be a storyteller of what you want to be true, because you're programming your subconscious to go out and find evidence to prove that story. And this is why so many people struggle and so many people find themselves fighting with life and wondering why these things keep happening to them. Well, it's because you're focused on that. If you can learn to harness the power of your attention and to put it onto things that make you feel good because your thoughts produce a feeling, choose the next best feeling thought. Because again, you are not required to believe everything you think. So choose your thoughts based on how they make you feel. If it makes you feel good, if it makes you feel relaxed, if it makes you feel more at peace, choose that, because what you're doing is you're calling that forward. You're calling that into your reality. And most of us are so focused on what we don't want to happen. So in that scenario and in that exercise, on the left-hand side of your page, if you're at home and you want to go through this, on the left-hand side of your journal, write down all the worst case scenarios. And I promise, if you read them out loud, you're going to be like, wow, I'm really using my imagination here to tell a crazy nightmare. I don't want to live that. I don't want to read that story. I would not pick that up off a shelf if I knew that's how it was going to go down, right? And on the right-hand side of the page, write all of the possibilities, all of the possible ways things could go in your favor, that, how this breakup or this setback or this challenge could actually be a setup for exactly what you're trying to call in, how it can work out better than you ever imagined. For us, we're now moving in a couple weeks into a house that's going to serve our needs in such a better way. And it's something I can't wait for. I'm excited. And it's not something I'm fighting. And when you on that right side of the page, then I want you to use the power of visualization. So imagination first. Imagine all the possible outcomes that are favorable, are exciting. And then allow yourself to ruminate and think about what that would feel like if that reality unfolded, how it was so much better than you could have ever imagined, that everything worked out perfectly in the way it needed to get you where you needed to go. Imagining that will produce a feeling in your body. And I imagine if you allow yourself right now, even in this moment, to think about how this could be supporting you, you might find that there's a little bit of relief, that your shoulders might relax, that you might take a deep inhale through your belly instead of this shallow breath through your chest. And now you have access to resources and to energy and to wisdom within the body that can help you take action in a way that's going to serve you versus being completely just paralyzed with fear, paralyzed with anxiety, not moving and freezing because you're just overwhelmed, which so many of us do. We come into a circumstance or a situation that we weren't predicting or we didn't expect, and it sends us into a freeze response. And we're just overcome and we're paralyzed and we don't do anything. And then we end up in a worse situation than we ever would be. Or we are sent into a fight response where I could have gone and tried to fight with this, my friend who's the realtor for my house, and being like, you can't do this to us. What are you doing? Oh, please, no. But, when someone's trying to possibly, like, if someone breaks up with you and you're begging them to stay and you're fighting versus embracing and accepting what is. I know it's not always easy because oftentimes these are things we didn't plan for. But I promise you, as you release your grip on how you think it was going to go down, and you choose to have faith that this is pointing you towards where you need to be, you will feel a sense of relaxation. And this, this is it within your control. I want to remind you that, you're not always going to be able to control what happens to you. Many of you are probably thinking about things that have happened in your life that you didn't see coming, where the rug was pulled out under your feet. And I certainly have been there. But we do have a choice. We have a choice about what we're going to make it mean. We have a choice, and we can control our attitude. We can control the thoughts and the stories that we tell. We can control our gratitude. We can control our outlook and our perspective. And that is where your power is when you choose to not be a victim of circumstance, but to use and harness and wield the power of your own creative energy in a way that's going to create a reality that you actually want to live in, that's going to draw the energy and the emotion and the experiences that you want versus trying to resist what you don't want. And that's what it means to be a conscious creator. And so I hope that this little conversation reminds you that you hold the power. You are the storyteller. You are the narrator of your life. And it's important that you are reminded that that power is within you. Like, you hold the pen. And so today, I encourage you to write a story and to tell a story first in your mind, but then speak it into existence. Use the power of your voice, speak it out loud, and allow it to like send a sensation and a feeling into your body that promotes a story that you want to live within, that creates a heaven that you want to live in, versus how many times do we create a hell for ourselves that then we're a slave to and we can't really escape. So that's my invitation today, is to come back into utilizing your imagination to imagine good, to imagine your success, to imagine your well-being, to imagine your prosperity, versus imagining everything that you don't want, because they all exist simultaneously. All of those possibilities exist right here and right now. And the one that you will experience is the one that you give attention to, the one that you give your most focus to. And so do yourself a favor and tell yourself a story that you want to read. That's all I got for you this week. I will see you next week on the Coachable Podcast.